Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live edition here on my channel. I want to thank everyone for joining. Today, I have a special presentation. I'm going to be covering drawing styles and techniques. And before I get started, I want to thank everyone for coming by. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, make sure to subscribe to receive future notifications. So, before I get started, I want to share with you guys some books that I'm going to be using for this live presentation. And for about a year now, I focus mainly on painting techniques. And I'm doing a shift now on the channel. I want to start talking more about drawing because I've had a lot of students ask me about drawing techniques. Drawing's a fundamental, very, very important part of painting, and I know I cover a lot of techniques, grounds, pigments and all that, but I don't really talk much about drawing. And it's because I believe that drawing is quite, it's actually a language that you have to learn. And much like speaking any language, you have to learn the vocabulary, the styles. And this is so important. And I don't really talk about these things in my channel because I focus mainly on those subjects in my classes online. But today I want to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that I use in developing a drawing, and some of the influences that I've had, in my own work, and how I arrived at some of those conclusions. So that's really important. So before I get started, I want to point you to this amazing book that I got during my last trip to Italy, and it's called Venetian Drawing. Let me just see if I could put this book right here. Venetian Draw. It's Venice Drawing, and this book has been very influential to my style. I, for a long time, have studied all master drawings as well as paintings, techniques, and I found some patterns that have emerged through the years as I study the paintings and the drawings. And there's a lineage of artists that educated other artists in succession. And this lineage is important to study because you see the style sort of being passed down from one generation to another. Nowadays, we have ateliers and we have tons of books, a lot of information. And it's really hard to make sense of all this information as you navigate through the art world, and even here on YouTube. It's really important to sort of define, where this information is coming from, and to sort of establish a lineage of, where the styles or the schools are developing. Where do they come from? This is so important. So I created a family tree, if you will, of artists that study with other artists. And before I get started with this, this entire demonstration about drawing and all that, I want to talk a little bit about two prominent schools that have developed or were developed during the Renaissance and even later on throughout the 19th century. The Italians developed a drawing style, peculiar drawing style in central Italy. It's specifically in Florence. A lot of ateliers, or talleres, as you say in Spanish, develop unique styles, and these styles were passed down to the pupils, and so on to the next generation. There's key masters that practice these styles, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. And most of the drawing styles that I'm going to be talking about developed from these masters and the influences that they had initially in the studios of, for example, Andrea del Verrocchio and Ghirlandaio, which are they're prominent masters from the Renaissance. They had very successful studios, and these styles began to proliferate and spread out. And eventually, during the 19th century, or I believe during the 17th century, mid 17th century, they found their way into French art via Nicolas Poussin. And from there, a new school developed, and that's what I consider today the neoclassical school of painting. And I'm going to be talking about these issues later on. Today, I'm going to be focusing on the Italian school of drawing. And later on, we're going to be talking about French academic drawing in later lives. So that's something that I've had a lot of you ask me about. Where specifically, French academic artists. But I will say, just to make a disclaimer here on the channel, I'm more allied to the Italian artists from the Renaissance and it's Baroque artists from the 17th century. I believe that the style from Italy is more expressive. And this is important. I mention this because it's important to analyze your personality as an artist. I like movement in my drawings. I like calligraphy. I like elegance, and these are things. These are values that I believe that Italian styles of drawings have, and they uphold. Not to say that the French styles do not uphold these values, but they there's it's different focuses. So that's important to mention. So I want to share with you guys this family tree that I made. I just did the research and sort of put together this family tree of artists that are related to each other, that were influential to each other or studied with one another. Wherever you see the arrow, that means that the artist studied directly with the artist, and then and otherwise, if as indicated in the chart, you'll see that it will say influenced by or influenced. So let's just go ahead and take a look at this chart. So this is a chart that I made of the Italian School of Drawing. And I began with Andrea del Verrocchio, although there's many other artists that were predecessors to Andrea del Verrocchio and influenced heavily by Masaccio and Giotto. These are artists that were working in the early Renaissance. But Andrea del Verrocchio is one of the first artists that had a big studio with a lot of students, and he was very influential. And another important factor is that he was a sculptor. And this idea of sculpture, three-dimensional forms, really found its way into Italian drawing. That's that's one of the reasons that I focus on Verrocchio. Now, a lot of these artists were trained, as I did my research, they were trained as goldsmiths and sculptors as well. So not so much painters. And it's important that I mention this because here you have an instance where perhaps, in the case of Leonardo da Vinci, who's also a sculptor, he's a painter, a sculptor, a mathematician. He was many things, but you don't really see many artists of the later generations undertake various disciplines. And here you have a chart where you see Leonardo da Vinci that studied with Andrea del Verrocchio, and Ghirlandaio, who's Michelangelo's teacher, also studied under Andrea del Verrocchio. Ghirlandaio is a sculptor as well, ran a very successful studio and had many successful pupils, studied and practiced thereafter. And you see how the two schools, of drawing, Florentine drawing, the school of Michelangelo and the school of Leonardo, sort of give birth to other artists from there. So Ghirlandaio educates Michelangelo, and Michelangelo influenced Raphael, Tintoretto, and Rubens. And on the other side, you have Leonardo da Vinci, who's an artist that is initially very interested in form, but then he is transformed by the ideas of aerial perspective. And these are fundamental to the development of drawing as well, because he will be exploring the ideas of atmosphere in drawing. And there you see how he influenced the northern artists, such as the Venetians. And that's where some of my influences come from, mostly. I love Venetian art, and you see Titian being, a really, really strong influence on a lot of artists from the Baroque era. And Titian influences Tintoretto. Actually, Tintoretto is documented as studying with Titian. And from there, Rubens in the 17th century goes back to Italy and studies both Michelangelo and Titian. And then, of course, Rubens educated Van Dyck. And I believe that this is an important family tree, because you see a lot of artists, especially Rubens and Van Dyck, sort of embrace both style, both colore and disegno, as the Italians call it. They're working with mass, and they're also working with line. And this is so important. You see also Titian working with line and mass. And I want to share with you guys a drawing of Titian's, one of my favorite drawings. This is a portrait of a young woman by Titian. Here you see the use of a toned ground or color paper with white chalk and some use of black chalk. In those days, they were using black chalk. I found that the use of black chalk and the use of vine charcoal sort of are very similar. And this is important because the vine charcoal feels a lot like paint. It's a very loose material. You could erase it very easily. As a matter of fact, on a lot of my classes, I teach my students to work with vine charcoal primarily because it's a material that you could easily erase and you could essentially create a map. That's I teach all my students to start with a map, very loose schematic map. And this is something that I learned in my own school at the Pennsylvania Academy. They trained us with primarily with gesture drawings and the use of ovoidal forms, which is something that is very Italian. Now, the French school, on the other hand, uses mostly straights in the envelope, and meaning like a silhouette around the figure, and they focus on that envelope primarily. Whereas Italian school type drawings focus on inside forms. Uh, the Spaniards call this dintornos, which are inside forms. And these are terms that I found as I do my research on a lot of my books and manuscripts. These are very important concepts, and I cover these concepts in my live classes, specifically in my drawing course. And I couldn't possibly cover all these subjects here on these live presentations, but that's the basis of my drawing technique. I use ovoidal forms. I don't use straights, although I use a hybrid style. I practice sort of a hybrid style. I do like some French academic drawings. I'm more influenced by perhaps a lot of the romantic French artists such as Delacroix, and I also love Degas. And Degas was an artist that was influenced by Italian drawing as well. So that's important to create a consensus of what it is that you're being attracted to as you study drawings from the past. That's something that I did when I was a student. I was always copying drawings, and I love Venetian drawings. This book in particular is filled with just wonderful drawings from Venetian artists. I mean, as you can see here, this is just a great example of Venetian drawing. And you could order this book. I'm going to be including it in my kit. If you haven't checked out my kit, make sure to go in there and check out the links. I have a lot of books that I've shared for my painting videos. So I'm going to be sharing this book as well. I believe I got this book from Italy. It was a wonderful gift from my beautiful girlfriend. She gave me this amazing book, and I've been researching some of the drawings and some of the developments in Venetian art. So now let's just take a look at this drawing. Let's talk a little bit about the techniques. So a lot of these artists from the Baroque era, past the High Renaissance, started going back to Italy and studying Venetian drawings, specifically painters from the Netherlands and Flanders. This is a drawing by Anthony van Dyck, one of my favorite artists and probably the biggest influence on my drawing. He worked with gray paper and vine charcoal or black chalk. The black chalk is harder. It's more like a charcoal drawing, or perhaps a charcoal, compressed charcoal, modern day material. The black chalk is difficult to come by nowadays. You could find it in different stores. I believe Kramer Pigments in New York still carries black chalk. And what is black chalk? Black chalk is essentially hardened carbonaceous shale stone. And Cenino mentions it in his treatise, El Libro del Arte. And he mentions the rock being soft enough where you could sharpen it. And I've used it before. It feels very, very similar to a General's charcoal pencil. Okay, I use a General's charcoal pencil. This is HB General's charcoal pencil. I believe these are the best charcoal pencils on the market. Okay, I put them on this brass holder. By the way, I've been asked a million times, where do you get these brass holders, or where could I find one? I'll be honest, these were available for $5 at Utrecht back in the 1990s. I don't know what happened. I've found them online. I've shared a link, but then I don't know if they were bought out. So I'm looking for another source of these beautiful brass holders, but unfortunately, I have not been able to find any. If you are watching this video and you know of a source, make sure to share it on the link below or in the comments. And the audience that is watching the video could see the link and purchase these amazing holders. And why do I use this? Well, I use this to train my hand to hold the pencil at a distance, and also it helps you with the calligraphy. Okay, if you're holding the pencil like this, you're putting too much weight on the tip of the pencil, and it's very difficult to do hatching. I talk about all these things in my live classes, and those are just the little details, that I go into, and I can possibly cover all these things, but it's important to to explore those ideas of calligraphy, because drawing is essentially calligraphy. And as you can see, this drawing by Van Dyke, excuse me, he's using the side of the pencil, and he's just sort of schematically putting down the shapes, dark shapes. So he's not only working with line, he's working with line and value and mass. So these are important concepts that artists must learn in their academic training initially. And today I'm going to be talking about style primarily, but just to give you an idea, how do you improve your drawing skills? Well, it takes a lot of dedication, a lot of practice. It's important to study the fundamentals. What are the fundamentals? Well, proportion, perspective, anatomy, light and shade. There's just a whole array of issues at hand that need to be addressed and that need to be studied thoroughly. So these are things that I believe that an art school or a studio that focuses on figure drawing could give you. This is something that I learned at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. I studied there 4 years. It was a wonderful program, primarily working from observation, directly from observation. And I believe that was fundamental to my training as an artist. Nowadays, there's schools all over the world that offer this type of training. When I was going to school back in the 90s, most universities did not offer this type of training. So that today is something that has, evolved into perhaps digital drawing or other types of disciplines. So, but if you're interested in learning drawing, it's important to undertake drawing seriously as a language if you're learning any language. So that's important. So moving on to this next drawing by Van Dyke, excuse me. Something that I really love about Van Dyke drawings is his use of calligraphy. Now, this is something that if you are studying perhaps French drawings from the 19th century, or even, a lot of you are perhaps studying Charles Barthes plates, they're not big on calligraphy. And this is something that, takes a lot of practice. And how do you practice your calligraphy? Well, a lot of these artists were working with pen and ink. And that's another way to improve your calligraphy. I love the style that, he employs in this drawing. He's working with a very loose sort of, a very sharp pencil or chalk, and he turns it on the side to vary the line. And there's a focus on movement, and that's something that you don't see a lot of. Perhaps comic book artists or illustrators that are interested in animation, but in the fine arts, that the idea of movement has given way to the use of the photograph. And if you're using photography, there's no urgency to capture the moment as you were working. If you're working from life, there's a limited amount of time that you have to draw the model, and it sort of forces you to work faster, work in a looser style. And that's something that you see. I mean, this drawing most likely was done from life, from a model, and you see the very schematic use of the white chalk, okay, over the gray paper with the touches of black chalk. And that's something that I love. I mean, there's elegance in Van Dyke's drawing, so that's something that I try to emulate in my own work. Working with quick gestures, a very loose initial map in or lay in of the drawing. I don't use straights, and I use very light measurements because I believe if you're measuring too much initially, you're going to sort of create this very stiff drawing. So the a very specific drawing from life where you're measuring everything is wonderful to train your eye initially, but it's important to sort of abandon that as you get better and better. So I believe that there's an emphasis on elegance. Now, Pacheco from the 17th century, the manuscript that I mentioned here in the past, which is one of the most complete manuscripts of the age, mentions the word decoro, and that translates directly to decorum. And I, for a long time, struggled with that concept in drawing. I would say, what does he mean by decoro, decoro, decoro? And he mentions it all over his manuscript. And I believe that it translates to almost a good taste or an elegance in drawing. And that is not easy to come by. That's the most elusive thing as you're learning drawing, because it's the idea of learning a language but then speaking it eloquently. So that is probably the most difficult thing to do in drawing, to draw with grace, to draw with expressiveness. So, and those are more complex things that perhaps students at a beginner level are not going to address. So, but that is part of the style of Van Dyck and of Rubens and of a lot of the Italian artists, drawing with a lot of grace, a lot of style, a lot of decorum, a lot of elegance, and capturing movement and the idea of calligraphy. So these are three factors that sort of define an Italian style of drawing. Now, these drawings are not as solidly rendered as perhaps a modern day academic drawing from an atelier, and that's something that I enjoy very much because it sort of relates to the idea of pentimento, the idea of correcting and sort of leaving the drawing open. And that's something that I want to address here, the idea of open form drawing. Now, these drawings are, in essence, open form drawings. And what does that mean? Well, essentially, it means that the draftsman is starting with a very schematic drawing, and they're not closing the forms. They're leaving a lot of the forms very atmospheric. And it goes back to the idea of Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci was interested in atmospheric perspective. He's working with visual phenomena that describes space instead of form, or the idea of form and space hand in hand. And for the artist to get a grasp of these concepts is very difficult. So by studying great masters and copying their drawings, you're able to sort of assimilate a lot of their styles and their decisions. So that's something that you'll see in a lot of old master drawings. For example, they don't close the drawing completely in line. You'll see that there's areas that are open, and that means that it creates a visual passage so the eye could sort of fill in the forms. And that's something that took me a long time to understand. I see a lot of schools where they close in the whole drawing and they model all the single details, and the drawing feels stiff, or it feels overworked, and that's something that you don't see in these old drawings. So a very interesting concept to get a grasp on, and certainly not easy. This takes a lot of practice, a lot of drawing from observation. So now I've prepared a demonstration for you guys. I recently had my daughter visit, and she's here right now with me. She lives in New York with her mother, who's also an artist. And Isabella is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful model. she agreed to pose for me, and what I did is I sort of recreated this technique. Although you'll see my style that I use, perhaps French academic concepts, in the idea of modeling the form more closely. But in essence, in the beginning of the beginning stages of the drawings are set up very much as a very loose charcoal drawing or chalk drawing, and this is important. This because this is essentially the way that I also paint, and I wanted to share that with you guys. So I'm gonna share the time lapse of the beginning of the drawing, and then I'm gonna be doing more work on the drawing live. So let's just go ahead and take a look at this time lapse and find out what I did here. So this is my beautiful daughter Isabella, and this is the beginning of the drawing. I established a map, and the map is nothing more than just establishing general proportions and just an idea of volume and mass. I use a traditional proportion canons to sort of lay in, or as they say in Spanish, encajar el dibujo, or to establish the overall drawing. And this is important because when you are beginning a drawing directly from observation, you want to focus primarily on the big picture, the big planes, the big proportions, the overall proportions, and you don't want to focus on any detail at all. So there you see that my drawing is very schematic. I am using calipers as advised by a lot of 17th century artists. And from there, I immediately go to mass, meaning that there are blocks of light and shade, and you're working on a gray paper. This is vine charcoal. I'm not using any of the charcoal pencil yet. There you see that I start working with the charcoal pencil, and I'm just picking out the most important information initially, and that's what makes an open form drawing. You're not modeling every single form. You're just focusing on the most important elements of the drawing, and from there I begin modeling with lights with my white chalk simultaneously with the black chalk or the charcoal pencil. This is important because I'm bringing out the lights as simultaneously with the darks and refining the drawing as I work. I don't fix all the forms in place. I refine the forms as I work, and that's something that I do in painting. You guys have seen some of my demonstrations here. This is the way that I was taught to draw at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. You refine the drawing as you work, and you leave the drawing open so you're able to make corrections little by little. So this is important to remember that. I mean, initially you're just sort of placing forms and shapes, and when you get the drawing working, then you start modeling the form more closely. And this is, I see a lot of drawings from contemporary artists that do this very, very tight modeling, and those are great systems as well, but those aren't systems that lend themselves to working directly from observation. So if you're working with 20-minute or 30-minute poses, or even 10-minute poses from life, you can use graphite pencil and start modeling away all the shadows, because you're going to be running out of time. So these styles that the masters developed is a style to capture movement, to capture gesture. You see this style still being used by a lot of comic book artists and a lot of artists that are working in illustration, and it's because a lot of those artists do work from observation, but in a very sort of schematic way. I mean, you see there's a great author, Bridgman, who is practicing a hybrid style. He works in a sort of Italian style, and he also works with some French academic drawing concepts, such as the blocks. And those are things that, again, it may seem that I'm going off about these terms, and certainly there is a lot of terms involved. And I advise you, if you're struggling with your drawing, to check out my classes. In the description below, you'll find some links to my course on drawing that is coming up. And these are courses that are they're semester long, and they're designed to be in a progressive steps. I mean, you're going with light and shade initially, perspective. So yeah, certainly a lot of information. So let's just go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and switch the camera and do a little work on this drawing. I have the drawing pretty much resolved, but I just want to talk about some things that I could improve in the drawing. So let's just go ahead and do that. So as I work on this drawing, I developed some, very uh, exact proportions here. In the eyes, I did measure these proportions with my calipers, and the calipers are essentially a tool that you can use to establish, the different proportions as you work. This is a tool that is described by Pacheco. Pacheco was Velasquez's teacher, and he describes the use of calipers and to sort of capture the proportions as you're working. And I didn't really learn this system at the academy. I learned this system, years later, reading these manuscripts, and it's apparent to me that this is such an amazing tool, because as you're working, you could just refer to the model and hold the calipers up to the model and essentially, capture the proportions. So this is something that you see a lot of artists from the Renaissance in their self-portraits. You'll see this tool. So really, really important to analyze these tools of the trade. This is, as you're learning to draw, you'll need to verify your proportions. Now, as you're developing these drawings, you could work on a drawing much like a painting, with a lot of detail. But I like to focus mostly on the idea of what I call hierarchical details, meaning that what are the details that are going to bring the most form to this drawing. You see that in the old masters; they don't include every single detail; they just put the most important aspects of specifically light and shade. So, for example, here's a highlight that I did not include. I did not put the highest light yet. And as I'm working, I want to have a very light touch. And again, it's up to you, to take the drawing to the level of finish that you like. I like drawings that are more schematic. Specifically here in the hair, I'm using more calligraphy to describe, the idea of the hair. You could even take your eraser and do some calligraphy here to bring out some of the lights. Okay, so you're sort of using negative strokes to sort of describe. You could hatch with the erasers, certainly. That's something that works really well. And in terms of the transitions, a lot of artists use their finger. I like to use my finger sometimes. Sometimes it could smear the drawing, so you have to be very careful. Okay. And you probably notice that I've changed some of the proportions, and I do that from time to time in my drawings to create, a different feel. Velasquez did a lot of that. He changes a little bit of the proportions just to establish a different feeling in the drawing, more elegance. Now, some artists call it idealizing. I don't know if it's entirely idealizing the forms, but there's things that work better than others as you're drawing. And here I'm using a graining technique. What is graining? Well, it's essentially taking the tip of your pencil, sharpening your pencil, and introducing it into the fiber of the paper. It's a very effective technique, and this is mostly um, a technique that comes from silver point. So you see the artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael worked with silver point, and you could get some very, very subtle transitions. I train my students to work with this technique and to get some extreme subtlety with the graining by modeling spheres. That's something that I do in my classes. And you can build these drawings very, very, very delicately with the graining. So this is more of a technique from French artists, where they worked with very, very refined drawings that were highly modeled for many hours. So you could push these darks or solidify the darks. So for example, I could push this dark here to work on the expression. Now, this is a step that I advise students to, to work on this type of development as after you've set up all your proportions. You don't want to be working on details like this initially. This happens at the later stage where the drawings are fully developed, and then you're sort of open um, to refine some of those forms. So here I'm going to lift some of these tones to create more volume in the nose, tip of the nose. So these are a type of developments that as you practice more and more, you get better and better. And there's a score shadow here, or a third contour. I use the term third contour in my classes, and for those of you that have studied with me before, uh, the third contour is a very interesting concept. I won't get into it here. It's just too much information for one day. But so you could push these darks in a very subtle way, give a lot more subtlety without, creating these sort of extreme darks. You're just creating the reflective light in there, and subtle tones, subtle shifts, what I call slow rotations. And how do you finish a drawing? Well, a lot of artists have their different techniques to finish a drawing, but essentially it's up to you. I mean, you could work on this for days and days and hours, just like a painting. I like to use my drawings for to study painting mostly. So for example, in this edge, I could just refine this edge by just building, almost making that line disappear. But sometimes the idea of contour is really important. That's what most academic artists today do not use line. They sort of do away with all the line, and I really enjoy line. Line really describes a lot. It has the ability to it says a lot about the artist and the skills of the artist. So I really enjoy the idea of line, and to use line effectively is difficult. So where to use it and where not to use it. So for example, these very subtle tones here to get to work on the expression of the sitter are really important. So I could go on about this for many hours, but today I just wanted to talk about the different styles of drawing. In the future, we're going to be talking about French academic styles versus Italian drawing styles. It's important to know the difference. And let's just go ahead and put a little bit more information here. And we're going to end this live presentation. Now, if anybody has questions, now is the time to post your questions. I can't certainly answer all the questions, but I'll try to answer some of them. Okay. So again, you could just sit here and just very methodically work on all these subtleties as you're developing. So let's see. I have a question here from Irving Torres. Irving, thank you for joining. Appreciate the visit. It says here, hi, Luis. Great videos. So would you say that French academics concentrate on negative space and shapes, patterns, and Italians on form and construction? Absolutely. Yep. Well said, Irvin. Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, the French academic drawing, and I believe I train my students with both schools. I believe that you could certainly take from both, and this is important. As you're developing your language of painting, you'll probably want to focus on either construction or movement. So you could draw from certainly from both schools. So it's up to you. I want to say hello to Olga Irizarry. Olga, thank you for joining. I appreciate the visit. So let's just go ahead and continue here. So yes, very, very interesting questions and comments. Yes. So as you develop it's up to you what fits with your personality. In my studio classes, I train students with bark plates, but I don't overtrain with bark plates, and that's something that I make that comment because I believe that part of what the failure of academic painting has been in the past is that students, sit in front of a model for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks at a time, and they learn to draw something perfectly from life. But when it comes to la invenzione or inventing from, putting together a composition, they're unable to do that because their training sort of has hampered their ability to do that because they're working too much from life and from photograph, and they're not able to collage together or to invent spaces, and that's something that you see, in a lot of in the past, I've seen a lot of schools sort of fall into that trap. So that's important. You have to. That's something that when I was at school, it was talked about. The ability to be able to compose with figures, and you do that by uniting gesture drawings. You do a lot of gesture drawings, and you could put them together, and then with the photograph and gesture drawings, you're able to assemble. And assembly is really important, or construction, as you mentioned, Irvin. That's really important. So as you see here, it's solidifying the drawing. It gets more and more solid, and I could certainly work on some of these edges. Now, sometimes I use a stump. I don't like to use a stump too much, but initially I use a stump to sort of solidify the masses. So you could go on for hours and hours and model away some of these details. And I have a little bit of reflective light right on the tip of the nose that I'm going to. There's a third contour or a core shadow right here at the tip that's going to propel the nose forward. So little by little, by understanding all the light and shade behaviors, the ideas of form. By the way, if you have not explored my Udemy courses, I have Udemy courses that are focused on portrait drawing, and they talk about constructing the nose, constructing the lips, constructing the eyes, and how to use ovoidal forms. So that's something that you could check out on the Udemy server. I'll be sharing links in the description below. And if you're interested in one-on-one instruction, well, you could check out my um, atelier classes on Atelier School Online. This is a new website that I just launched. And this coming semester, I've already mentioned here in the past weeks my course on Caravaggio's painting techniques. But if you're at the beginning level, you could certainly explore my drawing courses, which are probably the best courses to take if you're just beginning and you don't have much experience. Those are the best courses. I recommend taking perhaps um, basic drawing course, and that meets every Saturday through an online platform called GoToMeeting, Atlantic Standard Time, and we do we do weekly critiques of the different projects that we work on. So those are the best classes that I offer. So, all right, well, if you don't have any more questions, I think I'm gonna say, let's see. I think we do have one more question. Let's see. Um, so, Raya, thank you for coming by. I appreciate the visit. It says here, hello, and thanks for your great courses, Luis. I learned a ton. Well, Raya, I really appreciate the comment, and that's really great. That's one of the reasons that I do these live presentations, because at the end, a lot of students just get lost with when it comes to all the information on the internet. It's really hard to make sense of it all. So this is important. It's also important to inspire students, a new generation of students, to to just love classical drawing. There's a lot of wonderful artists that work throughout history, and unfortunately, not everyone has the access to an art school. So YouTube offers a great way to share my knowledge and share my passion for drawing and for painting. So it's great that you're joining. That's wonderful. Okay, so let's just go ahead and wrap this up. Okay, so if you don't have any more questions, I think I'm gonna go ahead and let's see. I think I do have another question. I have my producer telling me you have more questions. By the way, so many thanks to my wonderful girlfriend who does an amazing job producing here the live presentations. I'm very thankful to her. So okay, so it says here, Richard. Thank you for coming by. I definitely appreciate the information and experience you consistently provide. I have one question. I think I see it where you've edited proportion, but can you point out where and why? So yes, interesting. So that's a great question. So there's sometimes when you see a distortion in the on the photograph. So if the lens, if she was tilting her head slightly, there's also a distortion in the lens. I mean, my camera is to the side, so it's at an angle. It's not directly behind me. It's at an angle. So the proportion will look slightly distorted. But I do things like this. So for example, like I'll strengthen the jaw line just to give more symmetry, and I will make her face a little bit more oval. That's something that makes the model a little bit more aesthetic, more I guess the term would be, it gives a more pleasant feel to the portrait, to have the face be slightly wider, especially since there's some foreshortening. So that's something those are the things that I usually do, and you see Velasquez do that all the time. So these are things that you learn to sort of focus on. Another thing too is that when you're so if you notice her mouth is slightly tilted, down in the photograph. So I just sort of lined up everything and made everything more symmetrical. So those are things that you begin to see as you work, and it's okay to change those things as you're working. Just to give the drawing a different air. So symmetry is really important in drawing and painting, and that's something that I enjoy very much, working with. So now, not everyone's ready to do that. I mean, as you're working and you're struggling with, the proportions and all that, so you probably want to stick to what you actually see. But as you work, you'll definitely want to, learn how to make things a lot more symmetrical, and this really aids in the overall air of the portrait. Now, I did post a photo so you have a reference of what I'm working on, but usually in any other situation, you would never see the photo. So you're just focusing strictly on the portrait as you see it. And essentially that's where my preoccupation with not having students copy photos, because when you're projecting a photo, there's no way that the projection will give you any of those aesthetic decisions. So and ends up looking like a projected photo. So those are the things. That's the difference, and that's why I believe that students that copy photos all the time are a real loss. So it's important to work from life. You see that in the old masters. If you study any drawing or any painting by the old masters, you see aesthetic decisions, being used all the time. So, all right. Well, so I think that concludes our demonstration. And I just want to thank everyone once again for joining and your amazing support. We've now reached, I believe, 12,000 something here on the channel. That's a number I'm still impressed by that number. I again, I when I started drawing in a classical style, I remember there was a big movement on contemporary art, and I didn't really thought that there was an interest in, a lot of people were interested in classical drawing, but I've seen in the past few years that a lot of artists are going back to classical drawing, and they're enjoying classical drawing, not just talking and learning classical drawing, but also sharing their work. And here in YouTube, there's a nice community, and I'm thankful for the community here and for this amazing support. I want to invite everyone once again to check out my courses, where you could get a lot of instruction, very in-depth instruction about drawing and painting. Atelier School Online is the website. You could check it out in the description below. Check out my Udemy courses. I have 5 courses there, painting, drawing courses that are well rated, very popular with students from all over the world. Again, I'm very thankful for your amazing support. If you have not subscribed to my channel, I want to invite you to subscribe, and I hope you could join me in the next presentation, where I'm going to be talking about, I have a few presentations actually. I have more drawing presentations, and I have something brewing up about artist canvases in a collaboration with an artist from Spain. So I hope you could join me in the future. Thanks again for joining. Have a great weekend. Take care.